There's a really dangerous comfort when you look at a map. You see the lines, the borders, and you assume the world is solid, stable.
Hmm.
And because we have all these, fiber optic cables and trade deals, you think the system has redundancy. But if you actually read this morning's intelligence report, February 1st, 2026, you realize that map is a complete lie.
Disillusion.
It is. The global operating system hasn't just run out of patience, it's run out of bandwidth. We are single-threaded, and the whole thing is just overheating.
This is Neural Pulse. Today, we're dissecting a convergence of failures, diplomatic paralysis, kinetic acquisition in South America, asymmetric warfare on the Polish grid, and a liquidity shock in the U.S. financial markets.
We're calling this briefing System Overload. And honestly, looking at the raw data, even that feels a little optimistic.
The objective here is to move past the headlines and really map the structural collapse that's happening just underneath the surface.
Right. The sources we're looking at today paint a picture of a superpower just trying to play whack-a-mole with a sledgehammer and missing every single time.
That's one way to put it. Let's test that hypothesis against the data. We have to start with the Abu Dhabi process. This was supposed to be the cornerstone event of the month.
The big peace talks. Ukraine, Russia, the U.S.
Scheduled for today, Sunday, February 1st.
And it didn't happen. The timeline slipped.
Correct. Pushed to February 4th and 5th. Now, usually a 3-day delay in diplomacy is just a rounding error. It's logistics, scheduling.
But is it, though? In this kind of environment, timing is everything. It's signaling. If you delay a wedding by 3 days, people start asking questions.
Well, in this case, it's not cold feet. It's a complete lack of capacity. President Zelensky himself explicitly cited the Iran factor. He said very clearly that events between the U.S. and Iran are directly affecting the timeline.
Okay, let's pull on that thread. You have the president of Ukraine, a man whose country is being ground down by artillery, saying his peace deal is on hold because American diplomats are too busy.
Too busy looking at the Persian Gulf.
It implies the U.S. State Department physically cannot handle two major crises at the same time.
It's a resource crunch. We have confirmed reports the U.S. carrier Abraham Lincoln Strike Group has deployed off the coast of Iran. And today, Supreme Leader Khamenei warned that any U.S. attack triggers a regional war.
So when that red light blinks in Tehran, the lights go out in Kyiv.
The diplomatic bandwidth drops to zero. The same key negotiators, the same intelligence assets, same decision makers are needed for both. They can't be in two places at once.
The global policeman is understaffed. That's the takeaway. But while the official channels are clogged, the back channels seem to be flowing just fine. This is where it gets really cynical.
The Florida Channel. While the official peace talks were being rescheduled, our intelligence indicates a meeting took place in Florida on January 31st.
Not at the UN. Not in Geneva, Florida. Who was in the room?
On the U.S. side, Steve Witkoff, a special envoy for the Trump administration, and Jared Kushner. On the Russian side, Kirill Dmitriev.
Dmitriev, that name. He's not a diplomat. He's the head of the Russian Direct Investment Fund. He's the money guy.
Exactly. And that distinction is crucial. When you send a diplomat, you're talking borders and treaties. When you send the head of a sovereign wealth fund to meet with real estate developers, you're talking about something else entirely.
You're talking about the price. You're discussing sanctions relief, investment vehicles, financial normalization.
It's the transactionalization of the entire conflict. It suggests the peace being negotiated isn't about security. It's about asset flows.
And notice who wasn't invited to the Florida condo, the Ukrainians, no Zelensky, just Americans and Russians deciding the future of Eastern Europe over, Diet Cokes and spreadsheets?
It creates a bifurcated reality. The official story is a delay in Abu Dhabi. The real story is that the U.S. is triaging its commitments.
They're cutting a deal with Russia to close one front because they're terrified of the Iranian front opening up. That is the sound of an empire cutting its losses. But if we want to talk about shredding the rule book, we have to look south. Venezuela.
This is a significant escalation in kinetic norms. The sources confirm U.S. forces executed a direct capture of Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro in Caracas.
Whoa, hold on. We need to be specific. When you say capture, are we talking about a coup? A local uprising backed by the CIA?
No, this was a direct extraction operation. U.S. boots on the ground, entering the capital, securing the target, and removing him. This is the kinetic acquisition of a sitting head of state.
That changes the entire game. For 30 years, the playbook was sanctions, stern letters, maybe you fund the opposition, but bagging and tagging a president, that's 19th century gunboat diplomacy with 21st century tech.
And look at the immediate result. It worked. The interim president, Delcy Rodriguez Maduro's former VP, didn't fight. She capitulated instantly,
Defolded.
issued an amnesty bill, released all U.S. prisoners. She's even turning the El Helicoid prison into a cultural center.
A cultural center. That is the speed of collapse right there. One day you run a police state, the next you're signing amnesty papers because you don't want to be the next one in the bag.
But this efficiency comes at a steep price. The pink tide leaders, Brazil, Colombia, Mexico, are all condemning this as a violation of sovereignty. Colombia's Petro called it a kidnapping.
They can call it whatever they want. The message was received. Sovereignty is a myth. If you become enough of a liability and the U.S. system is stressed enough, the so-called rules-based order just goes out the window. They will just come and get you.
It marks the end of the illusion of protection. But if physical borders are proving porous in Venezuela, digital borders are proving even more fragile in Europe. Which brings us to Poland.
This is the story I think most people will just scroll past, but it's the one that actually affects their daily life. We're not talking about a nuclear plant melting down, right?
No, and that's precisely why it's so dangerous. The Russian-linked group Electrum didn't hit the central power plants. They used something called Dino Wiper malware to target distributed energy resources.
DSERs.
The green grid, the decentralized stuff, wind farms, solar arrays. Exactly. For years, the argument has been that decentralization equals security. 1,000 solar panels are harder to take down than one coal plant.
But the intel says the opposite happened.
Because of the attack surface, securing one single air-gapped nuclear facility is hard, but it's manageable. Securing 30,000 internet-connected solar inverters, many using default passwords, it's a nightmare.
It's a supply chain attack. So the green transition just created a million new backdoors.
It created a grid that's managed by software, not by physics. And the malware, DynaWiper, is significant. It doesn't just shut things down, it wipes the flash memory of the controller. It bricks the device.
You can't just reboot it.
You have to physically replace the hardware. Now imagine that at scale. If they hit just 10% of the grid's capacity, but that 10% requires a technician to drive to every single wind turbine to replace a chip. The grid is down for months, not hours.
That's the friction point. You think you're independent because you have solar panels, but your panels are controlled by a chip, and that chip just got wiped by some guy in St. Petersburg. You're not off the grid, you're just on a weaker grid.
Which is the perfect segue into the vulnerability of individual assets. We've talked political capital, electrical infrastructure. Now we have to look at financial capital. The nomination of Kevin Warsh as the next Fed chair.
The war shock, I saw the boards this morning. It looked like a crime scene. Gold down, 5.5%? Silver took a 15% haircut. Crypto just flushed.
It was a bloodbath.
But why? Warsh is a Republican nominee. Republicans are supposed to be market-friendly. Why did the market just vomit?
Because the market doesn't care about party affiliation. It cares about liquidity. And Kevin Warsh is a known hard money advocate. He has been historically critical of the Fed's balance sheet expansion.
The money printing. So he's the guy who comes in and takes away the punch bowl.
He takes away the punch bowl and then he smashes the table. The market has been pricing in a Fed put for over a decade. The idea that if things get bad, the Fed will always step in, lower rates, and print money to save asset prices. Warsh signals the end of that entire regime.
Okay, but explain the mechanism. Why does a guy who likes a strong dollar crash Bitcoin and gold?
It comes down to real rates. If Warsh actually fights inflation and stops printing, the dollar strengthens. When the dollar gives you a real positive return, say you get 5% on a bond, and inflation is only 2%, holding non-yielding assets like gold or Bitcoin becomes expensive.
There's an opportunity cost.
It's a huge one.
Yeah.
The liquidity vacuum just turns on. For the last 10 years, the whole thesis for crypto and gold was the system is debasing the currency, so I need hard assets. If Warsh successfully stops the debasement,
that whole thesis gets weaker, so the market is reacting to a complete regime change. And that's the rug pull. So many people have been stacking silver, buying Bitcoin as a hedge against the system. And the system just fought back. With one appointment, they wiped out 15% of your silver. If you're leveraged, expecting number go up forever, you are catastrophically exposed.
And while the West is panicking over interest rates, we see a stark contrast in the East. The China pivot.
The silence versus the noise.
While Washington is noisy with confirmations and policy shifts, Beijing is executing a quiet, brutal consolidation. President Xi has initiated a purge of the military's top brass, saying Yuxia and Liu Zhenli are out.
And this isn't just about corruption, is it? Yeah. You don't fire your top generals during a global crisis unless they are incompetent or unless they aren't loyal enough for what you have planned next.
Analysts are viewing this as hardening. You remove the thinkers and you replace them with the doers. You streamline the chain of command for the 2027 to 2030 window.
Well, they're also shifting their economy.
Right. At the same time, Spring Festival travel is hitting a record 9.5 billion trips. But luxury goods spending is down. They're pivoting to an internalizing, service-based economy.
They're building a fortress, preparing for a world where trade just stops.
So let's synthesize. We have the U.S. distracted, cutting deals.
Yeah.
We have sovereignty being violated in Venezuela. We have the grid being hacked in Poland. We have the Fed threatening to drain global liquidity. And we have China closing ranks.
The synthesis is that all the traditional safety nets are failing.
Correct.
So where does that leave the person listening to this right now? Because usually, this is where we'd say stay tuned for updates, but staying tuned feels like a really bad strategy when the TV is about to explode.
The listener needs to confront their own lack of agency. Just look at the board. Your energy security, it's vulnerable to a software update on a solar inverter.
Your wealth, vulnerable to a single political appointment in Washington.
Your physical safety, it's dependent on a global police force that is, right now, completely overwhelmed.
The era of outsourcing your survival is over. You cannot rely on the State Department to keep the peace. You can't rely on the Fed to prop up your portfolio. You can't rely on the grid to work just because you paid the bill.
The vacuum is here, the noise is deafening, but the signal is clear. You are on your own.
So you have to stop asking, what will the Fed do? And start asking, if liquidity dries up tomorrow, do I have cash flow? Stop asking, when will the war end? And start asking, if the grid goes dark in my zip code, do I have power?
It's a shift from passive observation to active command.
Exactly. You can either be a victim waiting for the next war shock or the next Electrum hack, or you can take command of your own perimeter. You can be the warlord of your own life. Because the cavalry isn't coming. The cavalry is stuck off the coast of Iran.
Neural pulse. Clarity in a complex world. Decide your move.
Interpret the silence accordingly.